Hello, and welcome to my channel. I'm Margaret, and here I share real-life stories from my friends at the nursing home. I've taken the same pills for years. Then I started feeling different, like the room moved when I didn't. The dizziness arrived like a tide with no moon. Not a dramatic swoon, just a slow tilting of the kitchen until the cupboards felt several inches to the left. I braced a palm on the counter, feeling the ridges in the laminate, counting them until my vision found its center again. The kettle hissed. The clock above the stove thudded each second like something trapped. "Mom, you okay?" Daniel called from the hallway. "I'm fine," I lied. I am 58 years old, a retired school secretary with small hands, a calm voice, and the habit of noticing things. For 20 years, I kept a school's chaos organized. Permission slips returned, medications labeled, substitute teachers welcomed. There's a file cabinet in my brain where everything has a place. Lately, someone kept yanking drawers open. When Daniel married Mara, I told myself I would be kind and quiet, the sort of mother-in-law who drops off soup and leaves before it cools. Mara is a nurse. Registered, she likes to demand, with a smile that shows her incisors. She is younger than my son by 5 years, sharp cheekbones, sharper opinions. She wears her scrubs like armor and corrects restaurant servers on ingredient lists. I tried not to bristle. I've been a widow 8 years. Sometimes I let other people's certainty carry me because certainty is heavy. It started with small slips. I misplaced my keys twice in 1 week, found them in the freezer nestled beside a bag of peas I don't remember opening. I forgot the word colander and stood in my kitchen pantomiming draining spaghetti until I laughed and called it the whole bowl. Mara laughed too, but sideways. "It happens," she said, patting my shoulder like a nurse charting a symptom she'd seen 100 times. Aging can be tricky. I've taken the same medication since my blood pressure tried to punch through my skull 10 years ago. One small white tab in the morning, one longer blue in the evening, a tiny oval of cholesterol patients. The bottles live in a caddy by the toaster. I keep a paper log next to them with dates and check marks, old habits, old pen. When the dizziness worsened, when my tongue felt thick and thoughts moved through syrup, I added notes. September 4th, lightheaded after breakfast. 9/5. Felt wrong. "Maybe you're dehydrated," Mara said, rummaging in my cupboard for that stethoscope she keeps in her tote bag like a magician keeps scarves. Or forgetting meals. The word forgetting clung to the air like steam. "I eat," I said, stung. "I walk the loop every morning. I drink my water. I—" "You used to, Mum," Daniel cut in gently, the way he scolds his Labrador. "Mara knows this stuff. And I wondered when we'd slipped from the kitchen we all shared, with its crooked drawer, into a clinic where my son believed my chart more than my voice. On a Tuesday that smelled like rain, I put the morning pill on my tongue and paused. It tasted chalkier than usual. Pills aren't food. They don't really have taste. But after so many years, my mouth expected a certain dullness. This was bitter, medicinal in a way that made my jaw ache. I spat it into a napkin and stared. Same size, same stamp. Different. The room inched sideways again. The next day, I visited Ria at the pharmacy down by the post office. We grew up 2 blocks apart. She sat behind me in algebra, whispering answers I pretended I didn't need. Now she's the one who watches me squint at labels like they are a foreign alphabet, then quietly hands me the right magnifying glass. "Ria?" I said, setting my bottles on the counter when there was a lull. "Do these look right to you?" She turned them in her hands, checked the lot numbers, the tiny stamped code on the tablets. "They're generics," she said. Your insurance must have switched wholesalers. Sometimes they look different. They taste different, I said, and felt foolish. And I feel not myself. Her eyes softened behind her glasses. Sit a minute. She took one of the white tablets, frowned, then disappeared into the back. I stood there listening to the chime on the door, to someone asking where the cough drops were, to the hum of the refrigerated case. Ria reappeared with a small tray. This one isn't your usual medication, she said in a low voice. It's the same class, but a higher dose and a different brand than your prescription specifies. It could make you dizzy. Did we fill this? She checked the label again and shook her head. This label is ours, but I didn't send you this manufacturer. I felt the floor tilt, but not from dizziness. What are you saying? I'm saying something's off. She tapped the pill with a gloved finger. Do you have anyone else handling your meds? Sometimes family tries to help, and bottles get swapped. She said the words carefully, like a nurse untangling IV lines without blowing an alarm. I thought of Mara in my kitchen, her hands quick, the way she once said, "You should really let me set up your weekly box, to avoid confusion," and how I'd flushed with gratitude at her competence. I thought of the freezer keys I didn't put there. A buzzing started in my ears. I'm not confused, I said, too loud. People turned. I lowered my voice. I'm not forgetful. I'm being made to forget. Raya slid my bottles back. Let me give you a fresh fill, straight from our stock, she said. And Claire, keep an eye on them. If this happens again, come back. She hesitated, then added, and document everything. Date, time, what you took, how you felt. Do you have a notebook? My life is notebooks. I nodded, held the new bottle like a passport. Outside, rain needled the sidewalk. I stood under the awning with the cheap umbrella I never remember to replace, staring at my reflection in the pharmacy window. 58, lines like parentheses around my mouth, hair a stubborn brown grey, the kind of woman people describe as steady. A woman whose son now asked his wife if she'd remembered to turn the stove off for me, as if my competence had become a family hobby to audit. At home, the caddy looked innocent in its corner. I lined up the bottles by height, like students awaiting bus dismissal. The old set to the left, Raya's to the right. I shuffled through my paper log. 9/8, I wrote. Says tablet wrong. New bottle issued. My hand shook only slightly. I had always believed the worst people could do to you was leave. My husband's heart attack taught me that. I had not imagined that someone would try to quietly unmake me from the inside out. That night, Mara dropped in with a Tupperware of quinoa she said was brain-friendly. She set her tote on the chair like usual, the stethoscope peeking out. We worry, she said, smile glued on. Being proactive is love. Proactive is also nosy, I said, and her smile thinned. Daniel looked between us like a child watching a tennis match. I'm fine, I told him. Ria adjusted the prescription. Mara's eyes flicked to the caddy. Which one? She asked too quickly, then caught herself. I mean, that's good. I watched her hands. I have watched students sneak gum, watched parents forge signatures, watched janitors discuss divorces in low voices near copy machines. People reveal themselves when they think you're harmless. I pressed a hand to the paper log, feeling the slight ridge where the pen indented. I could feel my life trying to slide, and I set my weight against it. After they left, I brewed chamomile and sat at the kitchen table with the hum of the refrigerator and the distant throat clear of the old heater for company. I opened a fresh notebook and wrote in block letters at the top of the first page, "I am not losing my mind." Then, below it, I started a second list. Who has keys? Who touches the caddy? Times I'm alone and times I'm not. What tastes bitter and what doesn't. My voice is quiet, but silence is not weakness. Silence is where detail blooms. All right, I whispered to the empty kitchen, to the neat rows of bottles facing off like soldiers. Let's see who thinks I won't notice. The next morning, I set my alarm for 5:30 and woke to the dark kitchen, cool tile greeting my bare feet. I brewed coffee strong enough to stain thoughts and opened the notebook. I wrote the time, the weather, mist like breath on glass, and took my pill from Ria's bottle. I let it sit on my tongue just long enough to be certain. Faint chalk, no bitterness, then swallowed with coffee and judged, carefully, whether the room shifted. It didn't. I breathed. For an hour, I felt unmistakably myself. Joints creaked, mind steady, ordinary aches in their usual places like furniture you know in the dark. At 8:30, Mara texted, "How you feeling today? Remember to hydrate," as if water could rinse deceit from a bloodstream. I typed, "Fine." Ria helped, then deleted. Ria helped, and sent only "fine." I watched the message status change to "read" and imagined her eyes narrowing. By noon, Daniel let himself in with his boyish knock and a carton of soup. "We thought you might not want to cook," he said. He smelled like the office, printer toner and stress. And we were talking about options. "What kind of options?" I asked, setting the soup on the counter. He rubbed the back of his neck. "You know, like getting a little more support. Mara knows a good elder law attorney, just in case. Power of attorney, health proxy. It's smart. Normal." "Normal for who?" I asked, my voice even. He winced. "Please don't make this adversarial. You did leave your keys in the freezer, Mum. And you left your bicycle unlocked at 13 and it got stolen," I said. "That didn't make you incapable of riding." My son stared at me, startled. I softened. "If I sign anything, it'll be with my attorney." He nodded, chastened, then brightened. "Mara's on the late shift tonight. She could stay after and set up your med box properly. Make it easier? She hates to see you struggle." "I'm not struggling," I said. "I'm adjusting." The words tasted like hard candy you're not sure you want. After he left, I checked the caddy. The bottles sat like obedient children. I measured the pills, counting with the steadiness of prayer. Then I took a photograph with my old phone, the one with the cracked corner, of each bottle, each label, each count. I printed them on my dusty home printer, slid them into a manila folder, and labeled it in neat script: medication, baseline. My handwriting looked like the school notices of my past life. I felt, briefly, like myself again, a woman with systems. Around 3, fatigue crept over me like a shawl. A nap might have been delicious if it didn't feel like surrender. I made tea instead and sat at the window, watching a child scooter past in a purple helmet, her father jogging behind with a hand ready but not gripping. I thought about readiness. I thought about who benefits when you're seen as fragile. At 6, Mara arrived in her scrubs, hair slicked into a bun, smile fixed like a sticker. "Evening. How's my favorite patient?" She kissed the air near my cheek and moved straight to the caddy. "Let me see what we're working with." "I've got it," I said lightly, sliding the caddy closer to me. Ria suggested I be more hands-on. Mara's smile didn't move, but something in her eyes did. "Ria? The pharmacist? She's sweet." But you know pharmacists don't practice medicine. She pulled out her tote and set it on the table, and I watched, very carefully, as her hand brushed one of the older bottles. A small, almost invisible move, the kind of motion people make when they're creating cover for their intention. I felt the old school secretary rise in me like a teacher entering a rowdy classroom, calm, watchful, with a ledger in her hands. We made small talk that wasn't small. She asked about my sleep. I said fine. She asked about my walks. I said shorter lately. She looked pleased. "It's good you're honest about declines," she said, and the word clanged like a dropped tray. "I'll be setting up your weekly," she added, flipping open a plastic pill organizer with days like bright doors. One morning, one evening, simplicity. And Claire. She placed a soft hand over my knuckles. "If you do notice confusion, it's not your fault." "Of course," I said. "If anyone notices confusion, we'll call the right people." I held her gaze just long enough for the sentence to hang there, uninvited. After she left, the kitchen smelled faintly of her floral hand sanitizer, the kind that lingers and feels like an accusation. I opened the organizer. Monday morning had a white tablet that was not from the new bottle. On impulse, I tipped it into my palm and pressed it flat under a teaspoon, cracking it into halves. The bitterness puffed up, oily and wrong. I washed the pieces down the drain, heart beating in my throat. I needed proof, not instinct. Raya's voice from the pharmacy came back to me. "Document everything." I called my neighbour, Mrs. Patel, a retired court reporter with a spine like a metronome. "Do you still have that old nanny cam you used when your grandsons were small?" I asked. "You mean the owl?" she said, amused. "It's ridiculous, but it works." The next morning, she handed me a ceramic owl with enormous eyes and a charging cable. "Don't tell me why," she said, which is a kind of kindness. "But if you need me to happen to drop by at certain times, I can do that too." I placed the owl on the bookshelf facing the kitchen. It fit among my cookbooks, like a joke about wisdom. I practiced standing in the kitchen, walking to the sink, opening the caddy, counting out loud, letting the camera see what I saw. I felt odd, like I was playing myself in a documentary no one would want to watch. Still, the lens was steady. The owl saw without blinking. Later that week, Mara insisted on taking me to my primary care checkup. "Continuity of care," she trilled. At the office, she answered questions addressed to me. "She's been more forgetful," she said when the doctor asked about changes. She called the colander a whole bowl. She laughed. The doctor chuckled, and I forced a smile, imagining my respect evaporating like alcohol before a shot. I spoke when I could wedge words between them. "I felt dizzy," I said. "It's better now that I stopped. I wanted to say now that I'm careful, but that insinuated something. I said, "Now that I'm sleeping better." In the elevator, Mara squeezed my elbow. "You were brave," she said. "Admitting decline is hard." "I didn't," I said, but she was already texting. That Friday, Daniel came by with a folder. "Just some brochures," he said, fidgeting. "Assisted living options, not now, just to think about." "I pay my own bills," I said, evenly. "I walk my own loop. I choose my own library books. If I move someday, I will choose it." He exhaled, the sound of a boy who still wants to make someone proud. "Okay, I need to protect you." "Protect me by believing me," I said, softer. He stared at his shoes. That night, after my pill from Ria's bottle and my log entry, no dizziness, tea with honey, cloud cover. I sat at the kitchen table with the owl's memory card and my old laptop. I watched the footage of Mara's visit, watched her lay out the organizer, watched her eyes flick to the caddy when she thought I was stirring soup, watched her palm a bottle from her tote, labels conveniently peeled, watched her quick-fingered swap, practiced as a card trick, the whole motion hidden in a chatter about quinoa and omega-3s. I paused at the exact frame where her face changed, the concentration fading back into smile. I printed the still and slid it into the folder. Medication. Baseline now had a sibling. Evidence. I didn't sleep much. I kept seeing her hands hovering over my life like a magician deciding what to make disappear. I kept hearing Daniel say, "Protect you," in a voice that complicated itself with loyalty. Saturday morning, I went to the bank. The teller, whose nails were painted like little galaxies, greeted me by name. "I'd like to put a temporary hold on outside access to my accounts," I said. "And I need to update my password and beneficiaries." She printed forms. I initialed boxes. I felt both very old and very capable, which is to say I felt like myself. And the recognition calmed me. When I got home, I tucked those printouts into a new folder. Financial Safeguards. In the afternoon, Mara texted, popping in later to set up next week's meds. "Don't worry about it. I'll do it after you're in bed." Less confusing. The smiley face looked like a threat. I wrote back, "I'll be awake. Come earlier." I wanted her to know I was watching even before I set the owl to record. When she arrived, we went through the choreography again. Her tote, her chatter, her hands. The owl watched. So did I. This time, when she left, I waited 10 minutes, then opened the organizer. Monday and Tuesday mornings wore the wrong white. Thursday night glittered with the bitter oval. I tipped them into a small glass vial I'd bought from the craft store and labelled each with painter's tape and a date. The vials clinked like tiny bells as I set them in a shoebox, my strange altar of stolen clarity. On Sunday, Daniel invited me to brunch. Over pancakes, he broached the subject we were all circling. "Mara thinks—" "I know what Mara thinks," I said gently. "What do you think?" He stared at the syrup pooling on his plate. "I think you're my mom, and I think you're scared, and I think maybe you need help." I reached across and squeezed his hand. "I do, but not the kind you're imagining." He looked up, confusion knitting his brow. I wanted to tell him everything, to hand him the folders and the vials and the owl with its unblinking proof, but I didn't. Not yet. Evidence is a bird. You open your hand too fast, it flies. That night, I made a plan in my neat letters. I wrote, 2 weeks, logs, video, chain of custody. I wrote, call attorney Monday. I wrote, hold steady. My house was quiet. The kitchen clock thudded its seconds like footsteps in another room. I looked at the owl on the shelf and felt the peculiar comfort of being seen. My presence is quiet, yes, but it has weight. I would not be shifted. I would be the fixed point. Okay, I said to the empty room, to the folders tucked like armor on my chair, to the vials labelled in painter's tape. Let's move from noticing to knowing. Monday morning, I called my attorney, Mr. Kessler, a man with hair the colour of old snow and the tact of a priest. He's handled my will since before Daniel finished high school. I told his secretary I needed to see him about a family matter, and she found me an afternoon slot. When I arrived, his office smelled of lemon polish and paper, a scent I've always trusted. He poured me tea before even asking why I was there. You look resolute, he said, peering over his glasses. I laid the folders on his desk. Medication, baseline, evidence, financial, safeguards. I slid one of the glass vials toward him. This, I said, is not my prescribed medication. He listened, truly listened, the way doctors rarely do as I explained the bitterness, the dizziness, Ria's confirmation, the owl camera. He studied the still photos of Mara's hands mid-swap. His jaw tightened. "She's building a case that you're incompetent," he said. "If she gets Daniel on board, she can petition for power of attorney. Once that happens, she can empty the accounts," I finished. "Sell the house. Put me wherever she wants." He nodded grimly. "What you've brought me is strong, but we'll need a solid chain of custody for those pills, and do you want criminal charges?" I thought about the hospital stories Mara tells at dinner, her smirk when she says, "Some people shouldn't be left to their own devices." I thought about my son's unsure eyes. "Yes," I said, steady. "I want this on record. I want her license at risk. I want her stopped before she tries this with someone else." Kessler leaned back. "Then you'll keep doing exactly what you're doing? Logging, filming, collecting. Give me 2 weeks of clear evidence. I'll line up a pharmacist willing to testify and a lab to verify the pills." I left his office lighter, the way you do when someone agrees your reality is real. That week, the owl recorded everything. Every visit, every sleight of hand disguised as care. Mara never suspected. Her confidence was her blind spot. I developed a rhythm: log, photograph, label, seal. Each entry became less about paranoia and more about building something tangible, my own defense. Daniel called midweek. "Mara says you've been tense," he began, carefully. "I'm focused," I said. "Big difference. If something happens, I don't want to regret not stepping in." "Then watch," I said, surprising us both. "Really watch. Not just her version, not just mine. Yours." There was a pause long enough for me to hear him breathing. "Okay," he said finally. On Thursday, I invited Raya over under the pretext of tea. I showed her the owl footage, the stills, the vials. She didn't speak for a full minute. Then, "Claire, this is deliberate, and it's dangerous. If you hadn't noticed—" She trailed off. "I noticed," I said. She agreed to sign an affidavit confirming the pills were not the ones her pharmacy dispensed. "And I'll put you in touch with a colleague who's testified in similar cases," she added. By Saturday, the folders were thicker, my handwriting sharper. Mara was still smiling her nurse's smile, still texting reminders, still arriving with quinoa and subtle contempt. But now I met her gaze with a small, private smile of my own. Not smugness, certainty. On Sunday night, I wrote the last entry for the week, September 21st. 2 pills swapped in organizer. Video captured. Witness. Self. I slid the page into the folder, closed it, and felt the quiet satisfaction of a lock clicking shut. The plan was almost ready. 1 more week, and the fixed point would become the fulcrum. The second week moved like clockwork, if the clock were winding tighter with every tick. I didn't change a thing in my routine. Same morning walks, same tea in the chipped blue mug, same polite thank yous when Mara arrived with her tote and her watchful eyes. She kept setting up my weekly organizer. She kept swapping the pills. She never noticed the owl. On Wednesday, Mr. Kessler called. "The lab's ready to analyze your samples. Bring the vials and your logs tomorrow morning. I'll have the pharmacist there to sign off on the chain of custody." The next day, we sat in his conference room under a framed print of scales tipping in perfect balance. Raya handed over her signed affidavit. The lab tech in a white coat signed forms, sealed the vials in evidence bags, and tucked them into a locked case. We'll have the results in 3 days, she said. By Saturday, Kessler had them. The pills Mara placed in my organizer were a higher dose blood pressure medication not prescribed to me, mixed with a sedative I'd never been given. Long-term use could impair memory, motor coordination, even cause falls, he said. It's exactly the kind of evidence she'd need to claim you're no longer competent. I felt my jaw set. She's not getting that evidence, I said. Monday morning, I made my move. Mara arrived, breezy as ever. Ready for your weekly setup? She asked, already reaching for the caddy. I slid the caddy toward her. Go ahead. The owl watched. I watched. When she finished, I smiled. Would you mind staying for a moment? There's someone I want you to meet. Daniel stepped in from the hallway, confusion flickering in his eyes as he saw the folders on the table. Kessler followed, briefcase in hand. Mara's smile faltered. Daniel? I said, keeping my voice calm. I've been collecting proof. For 2 weeks. Videos, logs, lab tests. I opened the folders, one by one, laying out the still photos, Raya's affidavit, the lab results, the footage paused at her sleight of hand. This is what's been happening in my kitchen. Daniel's face went slack as the truth hit him. Mara. She stammered something about misunderstandings and helping, but Kessler cut her off. Mrs. Nolan, my client is filing for a restraining order effective immediately. She's also pressing criminal charges. Your actions constitute felony assault, fraud, and elder abuse. Mara's eyes darted to Daniel, but he didn't move toward her. He was staring at the still photo of her hand in my caddy like it was a stranger's hand. You wanted power of attorney, I said quietly. Instead, you've got power of a felony conviction. Kessler handed her a letter outlining the civil suit we'd be filing. You'll also want to inform your licensing board, he added, before they hear about this from the police or the local news. The silence in my kitchen was thick. Mara gathered her tote with jerky movements, muttering about how she was only trying to help. She didn't meet my eyes as she left. Daniel stayed behind, rubbing his temples. Mum? I'm so sorry. I should have... I stopped him with a hand on his arm. You see it now? That's enough. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept without setting the owl to record. The weeks after Mara's exit felt strange in their quietness, like walking through a house after the furniture's been rearranged back to its rightful place. No more unexpected visits with quinoa and unsolicited diagnoses. No more tote bag thuds on my kitchen chair. My caddy sat in its corner like a loyal guard dog, unmoved, untouched. The restraining order came through in less than a week. The criminal investigation moved faster than Kessler predicted. Apparently, the police take tampering with medication very seriously when you present them with time-stamped video, a witness affidavit, and lab results in a neat chronological binder. Mara's nursing license was suspended within days. The hearing to revoke it entirely was scheduled for the following month. The local paper ran the story under the headline, Nurse Accused of Drugging Mother-in-Law to Gain Power of Attorney. The reporter asked for a quote. I declined. My silence was statement enough. Daniel came by 3 times that first week. The first visit, he didn't say much, just made me tea and sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around his mug like it was the only warm thing in the room. I didn't want to believe it, he said finally. You've always been steady. I thought maybe you were scared of aging. I was, I admitted, but not in the way you thought. The second visit, he brought flowers and groceries. He put them away without asking where anything went, like he was relearning my kitchen's map. When he opened the freezer, he laughed softly. Nothing in here but peas. Where they belong, I said. The third time he came alone, no Mara-shaped shadow. He sat across from me, eyes glassy. She told me you were slipping, that she was just trying to protect you. I didn't want to see the pattern. Most people don't, until it's too late, I said gently. But you see it now. That's what matters. He nodded, then surprised me by saying, "You're stronger than anyone I know." In the absence of deceit, my days began to knit themselves back into the fabric I recognized. I returned to my morning loop without fear of wobbling off the curb. I visited the library, checked out a stack of novels, and read late into the night without the haze that had clung to me. I called friends I'd quietly stopped seeing when the dizziness made me doubt my footing. One afternoon, I sat with Ria at the cafe by the post office. She stirred her coffee and said, "You know, most people in your situation wouldn't have noticed, or wouldn't have trusted themselves if they did." "I'm not loud," I said, "but I pay attention. That's the whole game." I realized, sitting there, that what Mara tried to take from me wasn't just my money or my independence. It was the authority over my own memory. If she could make me question that, she could make me question everything. Now, I don't question. Primo record. I keep my logs, not because I expect someone else to interfere, but because I like the reminder. My days are mine, my notes are mine, my story is mine. The civil case is still pending, but the outcome doesn't weigh on me like it once might have. Mara's career is already over. Her name will carry the stain she tried to paint on mine. Daniel is slowly unwinding the knot of his own trust and guilt. That's his work to do, and I don't need to manage it for him. Last week, I took the owl camera down from the shelf. Mrs. Patel insisted I keep it, just in case. It sits now on the bookshelf in the living room, facing the window instead of the kitchen, a strange little guardian watching the street. I've thought about giving it a name, Wisdom perhaps, or Proof. Tonight, I'm making lentil soup. The smell fills the house, warm and familiar. My kitchen feels like my own territory again. Every drawer, every cupboard, exactly where I left it. As I chop carrots, I hear the clock above the stove marking the seconds. They're steady. So am I. I pause, pen in hand, and write in today's log. No dizziness. Bright sky. Walked the long route. Freedom tastes like lentils and thyme. Then I close the notebook, slide it into its spot by the toaster, and smile to myself. Mara wanted to control my life. Instead, I've reclaimed it. And I am not losing my mind. I am living it.